Welcome to Jerry Recaps. The story unfolds. Li Yunxiao had been in a trance all this while. Now and then, images flashed through his mind as if he had become someone else. He also went into a state of epilepsy from time to time, at times shouting, crying, and laughing. Even stranger was the fact that there was always a voice in his mind that seemed to be reciting a strange scripture. When he listened carefully, it seemed to be a cultivation technique, and his body always swayed involuntarily with the voice. The more epileptic he became, the more fragments appeared in his mind, and the more complete they became. Finally, he passed out from the torture one day. But when he woke up, all the fragments were joined together in their entirety and appeared in his mind. Li Yunxiao's eyes were as clear as the stars of eternity. He had finally awakened. Li Yunxiao! Suddenly a cold shout of rebuke rang out. A sharp noise broke through the air as Li Yunxiao looked up and saw a piece of chalk flying toward him, about to hit him in the face. He casually caught the chalk between his fingers and put it on the table. He was quite shocked as to what had transpired. I can't believe I was reborn. Li Yunxiao's eyes lit up with shock. He turned his head slightly to look out of the window at the tall statue that rose to the top of the cloud. The year 1033 of the heavenly martial calendar. I, Gu Feiyang, have been dead for 15 years? 15 years ago, Gu Feiyang, the vanquisher martial sovereign, one of the top 10 conferred martial sovereigns of the heavenly martial realm, accidentally passed away in the Tiandang Mountains, shaking the entire continent. While he was still in his thought, another voice came ringing, Li Yunxiao, you have got some nerve to sleep in my class. He turned around to look over. He looked around in the class and observed his own body. His shock further increased. Li Yunxiao grinned and sighed softly. I can't believe I've been born again after 15 years. I, Gu Feiyang, am back at last. Then, he looked calmly at Li Yunxiao, the class teacher, whose face was getting cold on the podium. It was several times that Li Yunxiao's mind had wandered in the class, so she'd be surprised if he wasn't distracted. But Li Yunxiao was obviously in a bad mood today, so she needed someone to vent her depression on. Her face darkened, and a sneer flickered around her lips. Li Yunxiao, we were talking about the crafting of weapons. Can you tell us how many methods common weapons are made with? Li Yunxiao was teaching the basic course on crafting weapons. Although only a handful of people could become alchemists, the most basic knowledge of weapon crafting was what every warrior must know. Li Yunxiao squinted at Li Yunxiao and thought, she has got a great body, long hair, and a pretty face. If she were to wear a red gown, silver horn boots, a blue cloak, and the frosty sorrel, I bet she would look exactly like Red Lotus Martial Sovereign. She's got a lot of potential for wearing costumes. I wonder if Red Lotus would kill me if she knew what I was thinking. Li Yunxiao's eyes seemed to flicker with a smile, and that made her shudder inexplicably. Li Yunxiao's heart gave a jerk. It was like a tame rabbit had suddenly been spotted by a tiger. A momentary sense of powerlessness made her feel like falling into an ice cellar. What was that? The boy's eyes, was he laughing? No way. I am a great martial master of the Four Quadrants realm. How could I be distracted by the glance of a common boy? Thought Li Yunxiao. It must be because I've been stuck in that problem lately that I'm a bit unsettled. The look of horror in her eyes flashed away, and she soon recovered from the momentary loss of composure, and repeated the question with a darkened face. Tell us, how many ways are there to craft weapons? The crafting of weapons? I'm a 9th-tier emperor-grade alchemist of the heavenly martial continent. Who in the world but those few undying old fogies would dare to speak of the methods of weapon crafting in front of me? Li Yunxiao, who had been at the pinnacle in his previous life, disdains from answering such questions. Li Yunxiao said carelessly, there are 48 methods of crafting common weapons. Li Yunxiao's eyes widened as she heard Li Yunxiao's words. 48? The classroom suddenly fell silent before bursting into laughter. Ha! This fella must be talking in his sleep. I told you so. If I had only looked at his composure, I would have thought he knew the answer. A boy from the classroom rose and spoke arrogantly. Trash, did you even read the textbook? Lord Yangdi's textbook has only 36 types. Li Yunxiao frowned as his glance fell on the textbook in front of him. Didn't I tell him there are 48 common methods? That brat turned a deaf ear to my words. He'll never have to come to my lecture again, thought Yunxiao. Yunxiao paid no mind to all the mockery. There are 36 orthodox crafting methods, he said in a calm tone. But 60 years ago, Feiyang invented 12 technical crafting methods, which have been recognized by the Association of Alchemists and listed as basic crafting methods. So, there should be 48. Luo Yunxiang's eyes further widened as she spoke. What did you say? What nonsense is this brat talking about? Does he know more than Lord Yangdi? He must be afraid of being punished, so he has started talking nonsense. Precisely. How could Lord Yangdi, a student of Lord Feiyang, not know how many basic crafting methods there are? The whole classroom was filled with mockery, but a sudden shout silenced everyone. Shut up! He's right. Yunxiang slapped the table, causing a gust of strong wind to spread out in all directions. Everyone felt an overbearing force come pushing at them, and their faces fell in horror. Some of the students near the podium were as pale as paper, as if on the point of coughing blood. Yunxiang stared coldly at Li Yunxiao as a hint of surprise flashed through her mind. Then, she glanced at the crowd and began to explain slowly. There have always been 36 basic crafting methods. 60 years ago, Lord Feiyang, with his unparalleled talent, invented 12 additional methods, which were recognized by the Association of Alchemists. It's just that these 12 methods are completely beyond the grasp of the average person, so Lord Yangdi didn't include them when he wrote this textbook, said Luo Yunxiang. All the students were astonished and looked incredulous as they fixed their eyes on Li Yunxiao, who appeared to be perfectly calm. Even Yunxiang was surprised. It was no secret to the alchemists that there were 48 basic crafting methods, but it was very rare for an apprentice martial warrior to know this. A thought suddenly came to her mind. They say this Li Yunxiao is illiterate in martial arts. Could it be that he has a gift in the crafting of weapons, which is why he has gathered a lot of information to learn by himself? The idea set her heart racing. If she could train an alchemist, it was worth more than a warrior. Let me test him again, thought Yunxiang. Yunxiang looked up and saw that Li Yunxiao was looking at her with a hint of a smile in his eyes, which gave her a feeling as if a teacher were looking at his disciple. That made anger rise in her. With a cold grin, she said, "Don't think you can skip class just because you've learned something esoteric. Tell me why we need to add sky crystal sand when making weapons. I'll ask you this question. If you can answer that, you can skip the rest of my class and I'll pass you with a full mark. But if you can't answer that, you will stay in the tenfold gravity chamber for 6 hours," said Luo Yunxiang. It was an opportunity or a disaster for Yunxiao. But who knew? Wow, did you hear that? That's a tough question. Everybody knows that sky crystal sand needs to be added when crafting weapons, and there's no reason why. Yeah, it's like asking you why 1 + 1 = 2. Haha. It seems that Teacher Naylan is trying to embarrass Li Yunxiao. Everyone in the class again started mocking and laughing at Yunxiao loudly. They could not hold their laugh. While looking at Yunxiao, her mind wandered. Li Yunxiao answered almost thoughtlessly. In fact, the crafting of weapons does not necessarily require sky crystal sand, but it is not easy for ordinary alchemists to master the degree of fusion between materials during the refining process after quenching. So, they need to use it, which has a neutralization property, to play a moderating role. There was an eerie silence when he had finished. Everyone looked at each other because they could not understand what he was saying. But Luo Yunxiang heard it all clearly. Her pupils constricted as she blurted out, "If that is the case, the more sky crystal sand you add in the process of crafting weapons, the better. But why is it that during the melting of karmat mixed with red copper, the more sky crystal sand is added, the more likely it is to fail?" He paused for a brief moment, and when he saw the look on Yunxiang's face, the thirst for knowledge, he smiled and could not help remembering the disciples who had followed him. Because the attribute of sky crystal sand is water, it neutralizes Red Kappa's fire attribute. So, the more you add, the worse Red Kappa's ability to melt karmic gets. Oh, I see. Yunxiang's eyes gleamed with excitement. So that's why. No wonder I never succeeded. What should I do? How to get rid of the influence of sky crystal sand? She kept on asking questions. This was the problem that had puzzled her for days, and she could not find a solution no matter how hard she racked her brain. That was why she had been depressed these days. Now that she had blurted out the problem in her heart, she did not look like she was testing Yunxiao, but someone who was seeking advice. Very simple. Treat sky crystal sand as an impurity, and use the refinement essence to remove it, Yunxiao said with a hint of a smile in his eyes. Yunxiang exclaimed again, how could I be so stupid as to not think of such a simple solution? She began to calculate quickly in her mind. The process of crafting flashed through her head and finally came to an end. Her eyes suddenly brightened and her face glowed with a happy smile. She remembered the face when Li Yunxiao answered her questions. It felt like he disdained to answer such low-level questions. Yunxiang rushed towards the entrance of the class. While leaving, she snorted coldly and said, "Class is over. Li Yunxiao, if I don't see you in the next class, I'll send you to the tenfold gravity chamber for 3 days." Everyone sucked in a cold breath as they watched Luo Yunxiang kick open the classroom door and head for the alchemy hall like a gust of wind. Could it be that teacher Luo was not asking questions but taking advice from Yunxiao, a student who spoke? Upon hearing these words, the whole class went silent. Li Yunxiao also started walking out of the class and spoke loudly as to tell everyone, "From now on I won't take her class anymore." The students' eyes were wide open as they watched Li Yunxiao leave. They could not believe that the waste Yunxiao could answer all those questions. "Hey, can someone tell me what is going on?" Du Feng was the first to speak. He rose directly from his seat and went to a tall student. "Boss, what's going on?" "No way." Shang Guanqing's eyes grew wide as he cried out, "Could he, a brat who has no talent in martial arts, actually be a genius in weapon crafting? What shall we do?" Lan Fei smacked him on the head with a textbook and said sulkily, "What genius? He has just read a few more books. Becoming an alchemist requires a lot more talent than a warrior. How can he walk the path of weapon crafting when he can't even open a single chakra?" "The boss is right." The crowd echoed in agreement, their eyes sparkling with different looks. Lan Fei pushed Shang Guanqing aside with one hand and saw several other people gathering at the other end of the classroom, whispering to each other. These few students were usually close to Li Yunxiao and could be said to be the opposite force of Lan Fei and his friends. Qin Rishua's face went cold as she clenched her palm into a fist. While the classroom was in commotion, Li Yunxiao was already walking alone down the street in Tianshui's capital. He looked up at the towering statue looming ahead and strode toward it. "This is the capital of the state of Tianshui. I remember Yang Di is from here. I wonder if he's at the Association of Alchemists? All would be well if I could find him." He looked at his towering statue and realized that it must be Yang Di, who made this statue in respect for him. He was a bit emotional watching his own statue in the center of Tianshui city. Yunxiao looked up at the Association of Alchemists. Although the tower was far inferior to those he had been in, it gave him a feeling of the utmost familiarity. After his memories had awakened, his soul had begun to slowly regain its strength. The first to benefit was the strength of his divine sense. He examined his body quickly and carefully. "This body is a bit troublesome. No wonder I was regarded as not having any talent in martial arts. Many invisible meridians have dried up, so they can't accumulate strength at all. Naturally, I can't open my chakras. I have to fix this body first. It looks like I won't be able to recover my strength anytime soon," thought Yunxiao. A few words were carved on an old stone slab in front of the tower. This stone slab was rebuilt in the year 1001 of the Tianwu calendar. The year 1001? Oh right, It seems that this is the year that Yang Di was promoted to third-tier alchemist and became the president of the Tianshui branch. I wonder if he's still here. Yunxiao had lived in the state of Tianshui for 15 years, but the branch president of the Association of Alchemists was not the kind of person he could reach. In fact, the highest level alchemist he knew was called Liang Wenyu, a second-tier alchemist. With all the knowledge he had accumulated in his 2 lives, he will be able to achieve a higher level in this life and reach the pinnacle of power. He pushed the door open and walked in. The spacious hall inside was much larger than it looked from the outside. The noisy crowd made the interior of the tower extremely lively, which gave him a feeling as if he had suddenly stepped into a bustling market from a quiet countryside. Welcome to the Association of Alchemists. A melodious voice came into his ears, and then he saw a beautiful woman in a fashionable dress smiling sweetly at him. What can I do for you, my dear little sir? Yunxiao smiled faintly and said, Little sir? The waitress, whose name was Lu Yao, smiled sweetly and said, You are the youngest guest I have ever received. May I help you? Although she had a beautiful smile on her face, she was paying extra attention to Yunxiao on the inside. I'm looking for Yang Di. Is he here? Yunxiao asked faintly, his eyes still wandering about the hall. Lord Yang Di? Lu Yao almost bit her tongue. She stared at the young man for a moment. Although she felt ridiculous, Yunxiao's indifference made her feel that he was indeed sincere. It made her a little confused. You mean the former president, Lord Yang Di? She asked carefully. Yunxiao frowned slightly and said disappointingly, Former president. So, he's gone? A flash of reverence instantly rose into Lu Yao's eyes. She put her palms in front of her chest, her cheeks flushed as she said with a look of longing, Lord Yang Di had made a breakthrough and become a 4th-tier alchemist 20 years ago, so he was transferred to the headquarters of the Alchemist Association. Without Yang Di's help, it would be more difficult for him to open up the dried-up invisible meridians. His present body was 15 years old and had missed the best time for cultivation, so he could not afford to delay any longer. His previous life, Gu Feiyang, was revered as the genius of both martial arts and alchemy on the heavenly martial continent. He was not only a 9th-tier sovereign-grade alchemist, one of the 7 elders of the Alchemist Association, but his achievements in martial arts also stood at the pinnacle of the 9 heavens realm. His current body was already 15 years old, and it would be impossible for him to regain Gu Feiyang's peak strength if he delayed any longer, let alone take it one step further. I have a list of herbs here. Can you help me find them? I need 10 batches of all the herbs. Yunxiao quickly took a pen and paper and wrote down a list of herbs. Now that Yang Di was gone, he would have to find a way to heal his internal injury. He could not afford to delay practicing martial arts even for a moment. Lu Yao, what are you doing? A voice came from behind. At that very moment, a man in a black robe came over. His robe was typical of an alchemist, and he had a curved badge hung over his shoulder, with a bright, glaring blood-red mark streaked across its surface. Lu Yao turned around and glanced over the red alchemist's badge. Then, she said respectfully after a moment of awe, Lord Jiarong, this little sir has made a list and asked me to help him collect the materials. Jiarong took the list and glanced at it. Let me check the list. A moment later, he frowned slightly, then crumpled it up like a scrap of paper and threw it away. Next, he said to Lu Yao, What nonsense is this? Lord Liang is looking for you. Yunxiao's face darkened. In his previous life, the prescriptions he wrote were priceless, and any one of them could be sold for a high price. And yet, it was thrown away like a scrap of paper now. Lu Yao was startled when she heard that Liang Wenyu was looking for her. Not daring to delay, she said hastily, I'll go now. She hurried away without saying another word and suddenly was relieved. Jiarong turned around to leave and said, This is not the place for kids, get out of here. Li Yunxiao immediately said in a chilly voice, You are Jiarong? It hasn't been 7 days since you were promoted to a 1st-tier alchemist, right? Jiarong paused slightly, and an angry look flashed across his face. How dare a brat to call me by my name? Even the dignitaries of the capital would call me my lord when they see me. Jiarong looked down at him and said proudly, I just got promoted to a first-tier alchemist 5 days ago. That's what everybody knows. Are you sure you really got promoted to a first-tier alchemist? Yunxiao said meaningfully. Jiarong's body trembled slightly as a hint of shock flickered in his eyes. What do you mean? He turned around and asked in a deep voice. Yunxiao glanced at his right hand, which was out of his black robe, and began to explain with a smile in his eyes. Your fingers have taken on a dark gray hue and are showing signs of peeling, apparently because you've been exposed to hell wind stone recently. Moreover, you emit a faint smell of blood flame orchid, which I reckon you've used to offset the aftereffect of the stone. Although the hell wind stone has a very strong fusion property, its side effects cannot be ignored. It's something common alchemists wouldn't dare to use. Judging from the degree of damage to your fingers and the smell of blood flame orchid, it must have happened in the last 7 days. And you also have a faint odor, which is the unique smell of tiger sulfur stone. That tells me you've been exposed to a lot of it lately. It is clear, then, that your alchemist examination was to forge a weapon with tiger sulfur stone as the main material. Jiarong was completely struck dumb as beads of cold sweat trickled down his forehead. Suddenly, he burst into a rage and shouted, What nonsense! When he had finished, he turned and left. Yunxiao smiled and sighed, Well, if hell wind stone is so useful, then anyone can be an alchemist. Besides, the side effects of blood flame orchid are no less severe than those of the hell wind stone. I'm sure you feel extremely uncomfortable at the acupoints near your forehead, the back of your neck, and your back at noon every day, right? Jiarong's body twitched as if he were electrocuted, and he could no longer take another step as if his feet were filled with 1,000,000 tons of cement. Yunxiao shook his head with a sad look on his face. What a pity for a talented alchemist. If you want to save your life, you'll have to chop off your right hand and destroy your dantian. You stop scaremongering. Jiarong began to shake violently. Forget it then. I was going to teach you a solution. Yunxiao threw up his hands helplessly and turned to leave. You have a solution. Jiarong sprung to his feet as if he had been electrocuted, then lunged at Yunxiao and stopped him from leaving as he cried out, Tell me now. He instantly backed off and took his hands off Yunxiao. He could feel Yunxiao staring like a dragon looking at his prey. His eyes twitched as he thought, how could a teenager have such a gaze? He had enjoyed the honor of the status, as well as the awe and envy of others, which made him cling to his present status of an alchemist even more. But now he has to bend in front of a teenager. Please tell me how to solve it. I beg you. Jiarong grabbed Yunxiao by the shoulder with his left hand, shivering and almost crying. There were still a lot of people coming and going in the hall, and they all looked at them in amazement. Although they could not hear their conversation in the distance, Jiarong's exaggerated behavior and his crying face still managed to attract many glances, causing the crowd to speculate about the young man's identity. Yunxiao spread his hands and said in a feigned surprise, Hey, where's my list of materials? Where's it? Have you seen it? Jiarong was stunned for a moment, and immediately turned his head to the scrap of paper he had crumpled up. Of course, he understood what Yunxiao meant, so he hurriedly said, There it is. Please wait a moment, I'll get it for you. Ignoring the startled glances, he trotted over and bent down to pick up the paper. All kinds of astonishing remarks came drifting into his ears. Yunxiao took the paper carelessly and blew his nose on it a few times. He then crumpled it into a ball and threw it away. I want 10 batches of every item on the list, and when you've got them all, come to see me at Jialan Academy. My name is Li Yunxiao. You. Jiarong felt a cramp in his stomach and a shiver of anger as he looked at the crumpled list on the ground in the distance, with slimy snot on it. Yunxiao stared at him with a sneer. Respect is not given by others, you have to earn it yourself. And you had lost my respect right from the beginning. A killing intent flashed across Yunxiao's face as his soft voice rang in Jiarong's ears. You better not hold a grudge against me. Few people who were unkind to me still live in this world. I don't want you to get your life back only to lose it later on. By the way, your right hand will probably last only 3 more days. If you don't find the things I want in 3 days, it will be completely dead. Unless you can find yourself a 9th-tier alchemy sovereign, you will never be able to craft again in your life. Yunxiao's voice was soft, but it filled Jiarong with fright, making him shiver violently. He mustered his courage and asked almost hysterically, 3 days. I haven't even heard of most of these ingredients. And how do I know you're not lying to me? With a faint smile, Yunxiao said, You are a clever man, and I'm sure you'll find a way. Concoct a potion with the leaves of white crescent bamboos and gray world ginseng, and consume it every morning, noon, and evening. It can alleviate the pain of your 3 acupoints, and also allow your right hand to live for 2 more days. But only 2 days. If you still can't gather enough ingredients in 5 days, you don't have to come to me. Good luck. He made his way toward the snot-stained piece of paper, ashamed and resentful. The surrounding crowd lowered their heads because they all felt the anger and murderous intent emanating from his body. Some were so frightened that they scattered about, not daring to look at him again. He is but an ordinary lad, either a warrior nor an alchemist. Yet why have I felt a shivering fear before him? Jiarong was immediately ashamed and indignant as he growled inwardly. I'll let you run wild for a few more days. When I get the solution, I will certainly tear you to pieces. Jialan Academy, Li Yunxiao. Inside a luxurious office on the 3rd floor of the Alchemist Tower. Here are the 10 caddies of spirit crane roots and white phoenix dragon lotus that Prime Minister Lan Hong requested. They are very precious. Take them immediately to the Prime Minister's estate and hand them over to him personally, Liang Wenyu cautiously told Lu Yao. Spirit crane roots? White phoenix dragon lotus. Lu Yao froze for a moment and murmured, So these 2 things do exist? What's the matter? What are you muttering about? Liang Wenyu asked, frowning. Lu Yao hurriedly came back to her senses. I beg your pardon, Lord Liang. I was distracted. Just now, a teenager gave me a list of materials and asked me to find them for him, but I didn't know any of the things. I thought he was just messing around with me. Among them were spirit crane roots and white phoenix dragon lotus. Liang Wenyu was lost in thought momentarily. These 2 herbs are used to improve the strength of warriors. Where is the list now? I gave it to Lord Jiarong when he asked me to come up here, and he had returned it to the teenager, Lu Yao replied carefully. Liang Wenyu was slightly disappointed. Do you remember what else was on the list? Lu Yao tried her best to recall. Ink feather ghost flower, nether fruit, vacuum nectar, Shiva flower, fairy bud. As she read out the materials on the list one by one, Liang Wenyu's expression changed from doubtful to surprised, then shocked, and finally blank. There are a few more, but I can't remember them. Lu Yao's beautiful eyebrows knitted together. After all, she only had a quick glance at the list, and it was amazing that she could remember so many of them. Liang Wenyu came back to his senses, then hurriedly took out a piece of paper and wrote down all the materials. Did the teenager leave his name or contact information? Lu Yao shook her head, her heart filled with shock. Who is this teenager? Why did Lord Liang pay so much attention to him? Lu Yao thought. Lord Liang, she asked cautiously, I've been working in the Alchemist Association for more than 3 years, but why haven't I ever heard of these things? Looking at the incomplete list, Liang Wenyu sighed. There are several herbs in the list that I have never heard of, but when they are put together, they give me the impression that they will make a very powerful potion, which is of great benefit to warriors who want to improve their cultivation base. Even Lord Liang has never heard of them. Lu Yao spoke. Lu Yao covered her red lips with her hand in surprise, a look of disbelief in her eyes. Lord Liang, is it possible that this list is full of nonsense? Liang Wenyu shook his head and said, No, the combination of some of the herbs is so mysterious that I can't figure out the relationship between them in a short time. If the teenager comes again next time, make sure you find a way to keep him and let me know as quickly as possible. Yes, Lord Liang. With shock and uneasiness, Lu Yao took the storage bag and left. Those materials are relatively difficult for Jiarong to find. I can't count on him completely. I have to find another way, Yunxiao thought to himself as he walked down the street alone. Looking at the storage ring in his hand, he sent a wisp of divine sense into it. The inside was full of all sorts of things. What's all this jumble? Even an aphrodisiac? Oh, I remember now. I had secretly bought it last time but never got a chance to use it. Then he saw a heavy sword inside the storage ring. He threw away a small bottle and took out a large black sword, slightly surprised by its weight. This is the only useful thing, he said to himself with a bitter smile. It weighs 32 caddies and 7 taels. I can hardly lift it. How I miss my sword, Star's Slayer. I wonder where it is now. Well, I'll use it before I open up all 7 chakras. Yunxiao carried the heavy sword on his shoulder and started down the street toward Jialan Academy. When I've condensed my primordial qi, I will craft a weapon for myself. By the time he arrived at the academy, he was already panting from exhaustion. 2 figures suddenly appeared in front of Yunxiao as he entered the academy. One of the figures charged at Yunxiao and tried to grab his neck. But luckily, Yunxiao dodged the attack. Both of them backed away together. Yunxiao tightened his grip over the large sword he brought out from the storage ring. It was Dufeng and Luo Jie. They both studied together with Yunxiao in the same class. They had been bullying him for quite a long time. Dufeng stared at Yunxiao with a grim smile and said, Li Yunxiao, you are drawing quite the attention today. Yunxiao stared at them. Just as he was about to speak, 2 other boys interrupted. Monkey Chin, Fatty Han, why are you greeting me at the gate? At the front gate of the academy, Chenjin and Han Bai, who were close to him, were pacing anxiously in circles. Where have you been, young Master Yun? Chenjin cried out at the sight of Yunxiao. We looked everywhere for you but couldn't find you. Skinny Chen, what are you trying to do? A loud shout rang out suddenly, and then Dufeng dashed out from behind Chenjin, staring at him with a grim smile as he said, Don't tell me that you want to oppose Boss Lan. Dufeng threw himself at Fatty Han, using his 5 fingers to form a technique eagle's claw. He strode forward. Han Bai, who was watching from one side, could not stand it anymore. He shouted at Dufeng. He strode forward and struck Dufeng's eagle claw with a punch. Both of them were apprentice warriors who had opened 4 chakras, so they were equal in strength. As a result, their bodies jolted when their attacks collided and backed off at the same time. Don't you dare attack again, Fatty Han. Skinny Chin caught Fatty Han avoiding his fall. He was shocked to know that Han Bei already opened 4 chakras. A man appeared beside Dufeng. It was Luo Jie, he said proudly. I, Luo Jie, had just opened 5 chakras last week, and I was worried that I didn't have anyone to practice with. Luo Jie dashed towards Fatty Han. Well, Fatty Chin, I'll use you as my target now and see how wide the gap between someone who has opened 4 and 5 chakras is, said Luo Jie. Both of their fists collided, releasing huge energy in the vicinity. Fatty Han, arm broke due to the huge power of Luo Jie's fist, and he flew backwards, colliding into Skinny Chin. Fatty Han cried out in agony due to the pain of his broken arm. Ha ha! The gap is that you can knock out all his teeth with just one punch. Luo Jie laughed. At the moment, many students had gathered around the gate, all wanting to watch how the scene would play out. They were all gesticulating and discussing among themselves. Dufeng pointed at Chen and Han and said, I'll give you 3 minutes to get out of here. The faces of Chen and Han turned livid with rage. Suddenly, from behind them came Qin Rishua's icy voice. I'd like to see how you make us get out of here. She went on angrily, I'm going to tell Yunxiao that he must attend Teacher Luo's next class session. What can you do to me? Yunxiao was quite disappointed by all the memories of his second life, being a waste, ridiculed, and a trash son of a noble family. This was all that people talked about him. But now, watching the princess of dynasty standing up for him, he was relieved. Du Feng and Luo Jie's faces flickered as they could not afford to offend the princess. Pointing at the few people, Du Feng snapped, "Skinny Chin, Fatty Han, and your piece of junk, count yourself lucky this time. Let's go." He waved a hand and was about to leave with Luo Jie. "I thought it was something big. Why do you have to make it so mysterious?" Yunxiao touched his nose. Even if Teacher Luo did not punish him, he had planned to practice in the gravity chamber himself. "Why do you want to leave just like that after kicking up the fuss?" Du Feng stopped, his pupils slightly dilated. "What? Do your pieces of trash have a problem?" Yunxiao walked up to the front dragging his great sword. He laid his hand on the hilt of the heavy sword and said, "I don't have a problem, but I just want to see how big a gap there is between someone who has 5 chakras opened and someone who has none." Du Feng, Ruxue, and the others were stunned, and then Ruxue blurted out, "Yunxiao, you." "Ha ha. Interesting." Du Feng interrupted Ruxue with a laugh. "Since you want to die, I don't mind fulfilling your wish." He shrugged his shoulders while speaking as though he did not care about any provocations. As soon as he had finished speaking, he activated 4 chakras kicked into the ground, and launched himself out, laughing and throwing a punch at Yunxiao's head. "How dare this punk make such a big statement? Watch out!" Qinjin and the other 2 cried out. It was too late for them to save Yunxiao. Ruxue was so frightened that she covered her mouth with her hands and turned pale. Yunxiao was just an ordinary man. How could he withstand a punch from an apprentice warrior who had opened 4 chakras? Everyone heard a dull thump as Du Feng's body suddenly froze in front of Yunxiao. His fist had been thrown out, and was pressing against Yunxiao's temple. However, Yunxiao's face was cool as ever, without the slightest hint of pain. A shrill wail of pain resounded through the air, almost piercing the eardrums of those who heard it. The palpitating scream was enough to make everyone imagine how much pain the owner of the voice had endured. What caused everyone's expression to change was that the voice came from Du Feng's mouth. As he had his back facing the crowd, no one knew what had happened. All they saw was that his body began to tremble violently, and then slowly fell back toward the ground. Du Feng finally fell to the ground, his trembling hands covering his crotch as his body twitched wildly. Meanwhile, he continued to wail and scream like a pig in a slaughterhouse. It was then that everyone saw Yunxiao slowly lower his right leg. It turned out that he had kicked Du Feng in the most vulnerable spot. "Li Yunxiao! You are too vicious! How can you use such a sinister tactic against your classmate?" Luo Jie's pupils constricted as he discovered in an instant that Du Feng's fist had not struck Yunxiao in the face, but was half a centimeter away. Looking at the shock and fear in everyone's eyes, Yunxiao spread out his hands helplessly and said with an innocent expression, "You all saw him rush up to beat me. I did nothing but just lift my right knee. I didn't expect he would run himself into it. What bad luck." Everyone present had the same thought in mind. Yeah, that guy ran into the knee all by himself. What a weirdo, trying to beat someone but ending up ruining his manhood. It is truly unheard of. All the male students present shivered and subconsciously put their hands in front of their crotches. Luo Jie cracked his fists in fury. "You can't be so shameless." Luo Jie was so angry that he did not know what to say. What happened did seem as Yunxiao had said, and even he could not see anything wrong with it. But how could there be such a strange thing? "Whatever your excuse is, you can't get away with it," Luo Jie said angrily. He opened his 5 chakras. A surge of energy rushed out from his body. "I think he has just opened the 5th chakra. He is actually an advanced martial apprentice. But that's enough to give that lad a hard time." The students in the vicinity started mumbling. Even Yunxiao's friends and Princess Ruxue were dumbfounded upon witnessing the 5 chakras of Lu Jie. "Today, I'm going to destroy your manhood and cripple your limbs. I will avenge Du Feng," said Luo Jie. Then his figure flashed as he dashed forward. However, he seemed to be somewhat afraid, as he did not attack from the front like Du Feng did, but turned to the side and threw his fist out. The punch whistled through the air with a force of over 1,000 catties. Yunxiao, get out of the way! Ruxue cried out in panic, running toward Yunxiao for the rescue. Fatty Han and Skinny Chin also ran towards him. Yunxiao clasped the hilt of the black iron sword sticking in the ground and lifted it in front of him, with the tip pointing straight at Luojie. But the sword was so heavy for him that he looked laborious and unsteady, as if a gust of wind would knock him over. Luojie sensed the danger but was horrified to discover that the sword, although seeming slow, had covered all his weaknesses and escape routes. It was as if he had revealed all his weaknesses and was lying on the chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. A rumble rang out as the two of them clashed with each other. A gust of wind flew out. Yunxiao stood there without moving an inch. Fatty Han and Skinny Chin halted completely in the middle of their attack. All of them were struck dumb. What happened? By now, even a fool would know that something was wrong. When the dust disappeared, what they witnessed was Luojie's fist that landed straight on the blade, right at the sharp edge. Luojie tried to bear the pain, but it was too late. A shrill scream echoed through the air, and everyone present saw Luojie covering his right fist with his left hand as blood dripped down. An excruciating pain washed him over from his right hand, and what frightened him even more was that his fingers seemed to have snapped under the blow. You tried to kill me? Let me destroy your manhood. Yunxiao struck Luojie in the crotch, producing a loud thump that made all the male students present shudder uncontrollably, their bodies turning cold. Both Dufeng and Luojie are lying down on the floor holding their sensitive parts and agonizing in pain. The onlookers were all discussing in amazement. They were naturally unable to see through the mystery behind the entire scenario with their eyes. Although Yunxiao had lost all his strength, he still had the discerning eyes of a martial sovereign who once stood at the pinnacle of the Nine Heavens realm. He had simply timed Luojie's punch early enough to put the sword tip in front of his fist when he could no longer change course. What's going on? Does he think that he can use his flesh against the sword just because he is a warrior with primordial chi? How could there be such a fool in the world? I think there's something wrong with that lad with the sword. The onlookers started murmuring amongst themselves. Yunxiao was also exhausted after handling the heavy sword due to his frail body. He stood there taking support from the sword and wondered, if I can't even get rid of a few apprentice warriors, I might as well kill myself. He snorted coldly as he carried the heavy sword on his shoulder and strode toward Luojie. Since you dare to attack my friends, I'll cripple both your fists. Luojie tried to beg and stop Yunxiao, but it was too late for forgiveness. Dufeng was also laying close to Luojie, holding their sensitive parts. They both were crying and agonizing in pain. Yunxiao first crippled Luojie's fists, and then kicked both of them. The kick sent both of them flying into a wall. They crashed into the wall, colliding with each other, and they fainted. I don't know. I think we should just leave them alone and get out of here. This lad is too ruthless. We better go now, lest we get ourselves into trouble. Let's go. The students who had been enjoying the fight ran away as they saw this whole scene. Young Master Yun, could it be that your meridians have been unclogged and your chakras have been opened? Qingjin said, exulted. Yunxiao shook his head and sighed. It's not that easy. Qingjin was somewhat confused. He pointed to the two unconscious guys on the ground and asked, So what's going on? Knowing that he could not explain it to them, Yunxiao laughed and said, Didn't you see that they ran into me all by themselves? Qingjin was speechless. They ran into you all by themselves, yes? But this is so. Li Yunxiao, are you really Li Yunxiao? It was only then that Ruxue came to her senses, looking at the scene with disbelief. Yunxiao interrupted him with a wave of his hand. Well, you'll find out in the future. I'm going back to my dormitory. When the academy investigates this matter, there are many people here who can testify for me. Once he had finished, he carried the great sword on his shoulder and started moving toward the dormitory. Yunxiao, even if we testify for you, the fact that you've crippled them with your sword will probably bring you great trouble. Ruxue cried out suddenly. The Du family and Luo family have always been at odds with your family, and I'm afraid they'll take advantage of this incident. Yunxiao's body gave a slight pause, then he laughed and said without turning his head if they tried to stir up trouble. He then struck his giant sword down between the legs of Luo Jie and further said, "I'll destroy their manhoods as well, one by one." Rishua's face flushed as she stamped her feet angrily. This Li Yunxiao is so vulgar. And why did he suddenly change so much? He has caused so much trouble, and yet he still seems as if nothing has happened. He is ticking me off. Du Feng and Luo Jie are indeed from the Du family and the Luo family, but they are not core descendants, Han Bai said thoughtfully. With young Master Yun's status, it's no big deal to cripple them. I don't believe their families would dare to seek justice from the Li family. I just worry that they'll go after young Master Yun directly. If that is the case, he'll be in great danger. Chen Jin snorted. They wouldn't dare to be so arrogant in the academy. Sending someone to kill a student in the academy would just make them die faster than offending the Li family. Outsiders certainly wouldn't dare to kill someone in the academy, Han Bai said while frowning. But if it is other students, the academy would just turn a blind eye. Ru Xue's face flickered. Do you mean Lan Fei? Han Bai nodded with a serious expression. Everybody knows that Du Feng is Lan Fei's man, and Lan Fei has opened his seventh chakra, and is on the verge of condensing primordial qi and breaking into the warrior realm. Ru Xue and Chen Jin's faces grew grave. Warriors and apprentice warriors were two completely different concepts, not to mention the fact that Yunxiao was not even an apprentice warrior. The three of them discussed for a while, but they could not come up with a solution. In the end, they left the place while sighing. The Li family held great power in the military of Tianshui state. Therefore, although Yunxiao had long been abandoned by his family due to his physique, he still had a separate dormitory in the academy, which came with a separate cultivating room. Yunxiao entered his dormitory and thought, this body is quite weak. I must somehow strengthen it even though my meridians are clogged. He casually dropped the black iron sword on the ground. Then he began to swing his arms and press his legs, performing all kinds of poses to exercise his bones and muscles. The heavenly martial world once held a martial arts conference, where the 10 strongest martial artists were given titles. They are called the top 10 martial sovereigns, the pinnacle of martial power in the heavenly martial world. The tyrant martial sovereign was recognized as the strongest of the 10 conferred martial sovereigns. Yunxiao had obtained the body tempering technique from Tyrant by chance. He never dared to let anyone know about it, and had intended to practice it secretly. But who knew that he would die in the Tiandang Mountains before he could even begin? He is determined to reach greater heights in this life compared to his past. This body is too weak. I must make it strong as soon as possible. The Tyrant body tempering technique is the strongest body tempering technique in the world. It was too late in my previous life when I got it, and I died before I had time to cultivate it. Well, now is the perfect time to start cultivating it, thought Yunxiao. He let out a deep cry as he squatted down on the spot while his body slowly bent forward. Then, his upper body suddenly arched backward, his hands touching the back of his legs and forming a circle as a strange aura spread from him. A terrible pain rose into his head from his waist, as if a sharp knife was cutting his body apart. Yunxiao could no longer endure the pain. His face turned pale as his whole body went out of control. His upper body bounced back instantly, and he lost his balance, stumbling before he fell straight to the ground. It was too painful to practice this technique. He lifted his face and breathed heavily. He wondered, why is this cultivation technique so abnormal? I feel like my whole body is about to be torn apart. No wonder that Tyrant is so strong, it's so painful just to get started. With this technique, even if I can't open up any chakras, it will be enough for me to cultivate to the martial sovereign level. With determination to reach the peak, he decided to practice again. Yunxiao took a deep breath as he let out a deep cry and bent his upper body back once again. Every individual who had cultivated to the peak of the 9 heavens realm had an amazing perseverance. Although talent was important, what was more important was the courage and determination to never give up. Yunxiao shouted as he bent over again for practice, the first style of the tyrant body tempering technique, moon and sun. He again bent his body into a circle. The tremendous pulling force made him feel as if his body was being torn apart by horses while every inch of his muscle and bone began to break. This time, he held on for 5 seconds, before being thrown out and slammed straight into the wall. His insides were so shaken that his blood boiled violently, causing him to cough up a mouthful of blood. The 2 setbacks had made his inner pride soar. If that tyrant can cultivate it, I'm going to do it better than him. Although Tyrant's strength was recognized as the strongest among the 10 conferred martial sovereigns, none of them were willing to admit inferiority to the others. They were all proud individuals who looked down on every being in the world. Again, he gave a loud shout. The moon and sun style. Yunxiao's cries could be heard even outside his dormitory. Despite the bone-breaking pain, he kept on practicing the technique for a whole day. A day later, in the gravity-cultivating hall of the academy, many teleportation arrays were inscribed on the ground paved with bluestone bricks, each leading to a different gravity zone. Students could be transferred directly to their destinations by placing a primordial stone in the array. These arrays were scattered across several acres of land, and only the capital of a state had the strength to construct such a cultivating venue. In the center of the dozens of arrays was a tall, thousands of meters squared platform. It was the return point of all the gravity regions. Yunxiao looked at the students and their youthful faces as they came and went, his thoughts drifting back to decades ago. At that time, he was just an ordinary apprentice warrior. Like all the students here, he listened to the legends of the heroes and worked hard day and night to advance forward on the road of the strongest. Most of the students who came here voluntarily were the children of poor families. They only hoped that they could become the warriors of the state one day, rise above the crowd, and bring glory to their ancestors. Everyone was transferred out in high spirits, and then returned like frozen eggplants, dispirited and discouraged. Everyone was self-absorbed, and few people talked. Occasionally, they all looked surprised when they saw Yunxiao dressed in splendid clothes. Upon meeting their eyes with Yunxiao, they instantly turned their faces away, in fear of the noble families or respect. Yunxiao decided to go to tenfold gravity training to practice the tyrant body tempering method. Yunxiao stepped into the yellow array marked with the words tenfold, and put a primordial stone in it. Immediately, a blue light rose from the array and wrapped him up. Soon, his figure faded away and disappeared from the hall. In the next moment, just as he arrived at his destination, he felt a tremendous tearing force coming from the ground. His whole body collapsed in a flash. All his flesh and blood were squeezed together. Yunxiao gasped for breath. He was mentally prepared, but because of the severe lack of blood in his upper body, he became unusually pale and his whole body was deformed slightly. He forced himself upright and looked around. The entire tenfold gravity region was even larger than the gravity training hall, divided into many cultivating chambers numbered from 001 to 200. As there were tens of thousands of students in Jialan College, 200 cultivating chambers were not that many. There were a lot of students who did not have a chamber at the moment, and were meditating in the public area while waiting instead. Yunxiao quickly swept the surroundings with his divine sense, and then walked towards chamber 013 while panting. Every step he took required almost all of his strength, and the pores of his entire body opened and closed dramatically under the pull of gravity, while he breathed spontaneously. I have to master the moon and sun style as soon as possible so that this body can endure the use of the medicine to break through my meridians. It took him more than half a minute to move to chamber 013. Just as he was arriving, the door suddenly opened. A pale, sweaty student came out of the chamber. As soon as he saw Yunxiao, the student was slightly stunned, and immediately lowered his head and walked in the direction of the teleportation array. It is not easy to have a vacant chamber. Why was it taken by this guy? Everybody present in the gravity hall was stunned by this coincidence. We've been waiting for most of the day for one to come out. Why was this new guy so lucky? Yeah, he seemed to know that the student in 013 was coming out. Who is this guy? Why can't I feel any primordial chi fluctuation emanating from him? The students waiting in the lobby started murmuring and giving remarks on Yunxiao. Yunxiao ignored all of their remarks and walked straight toward the training chamber. Just as Yunxiao was about to step into Chamber 013, a hand suddenly reached over and stopped him. A student, smiling and dressed in a white robe, stood in front of him. My name is Yu Hujing, and I am an intermediate student who has opened 7 chakras, a peak-level apprentice warrior. You're new here, aren't you, little brother? Give me this chamber. There were 4 grades of students in the college, namely the junior class, the intermediate class, the advanced class, and the graduate class. Yunxiao looked up and said coldly, Who are you? Get out of my sight. Hujing's face flickered, but he seemed to have thought of something after a fit of rage. He glanced behind him quietly as he regained his composure and said, You must be new here. Give me a face today. If you need any help in the college, just mention my name. Mention what? Are you going to move now or what? Yunxiao did not bother to even listen to him and spoke with a demeanor. Hujing's face finally turned livid, even turning a little black. No one had ever dared to refuse him in such a way. He laughed out of fury and said, Haha. You have guts. How dare you, a loser who doesn't even have primordial chi fluctuation, talk to me like that? Well, I will teach you some rules that a freshman should follow today. As his voice faded away, the aura of his body suddenly soared, forming a faint pressure that blasted toward Yunxiao. As he released his aura, all the students shifted their focus towards both of them. Primordial chi? Has Yu Hujing condensed primordial chi and broken through to the origin realm? A cry of surprise sounded in the public area and immediately attracted all eyes. Everyone's face was full of wonder. I don't think so. He should still be an apprentice warrior. If he broke through to the warrior realm, his body should have the glow of primordial chi and not just the pressure. I'm in a good mood today, kid, so I'll just break all your ribs and spare your life. As he listened to the shocked conversation around him, Hujing felt a surge of pride. He wanted to show off his might, especially now that the goddess he wanted to woo was standing behind him. A force began to build up in his fist. He threw his fist out, his arm crackling as if beans were being roasted inside. A mighty gust of wind spread out from the punch as it flew toward Yunxiao like a savage tiger. Tiger punch? Not bad. However, this technique is not only about the momentum of a savage tiger but also about the timing to land a fatal blow. You have the form but lack the essence. Just as everyone broke into a cold sweat for Yunxiao, he started commenting on Hujing's attack like a teacher guiding a student. Has this kid lost his mind? How could he still have the mood to mock in the face of a punch thrown out by a peak-level apprentice warrior who has opened 7 chakras? A student said as his eyes grew wide. I don't think he's mocking me. Although he's somewhat arrogant, he's got a point, said another student thoughtfully. A student next to them shook his head and said, whether he's got a point or not, how can he dodge a punch from a peak-level apprentice warrior? Unless he has the strength of a warrior, he's going to suffer. Hujing was so angry that he could not help adding more strength to his fist. Initially, he only wanted to wound Yunxiao, but he was determined to cripple this posturing brat with the punch now. His hands were about to reach Yunxiao, just then. Yunxiao turned around in an instant. He cried out as he took a step forward and put his hands with fingers bent into claws before his chest, performing a dragon form that opened its mouth widely to devour everything. Everyone seemed to turn into an illusion of a dragon roaring in their ears. Hujing's pupils constricted suddenly. His tiger punch had already covered Yunxiao's whole body and was unavoidable. Yet, he did not expect Yunxiao to give him the impression of swallowing the world by just performing a dragon form. Not only had it destroyed the tiger's might of his punch, but it also looked like a huge mouth, waiting for him to throw himself in. As Hujing closed in, Yunxiao gave out a smirk. What is this? Why did I feel like I was a sheep walking into a tiger's mouth? Hujing was shocked, but he soon calmed down. No matter how weird your move is, I'm a peak-level apprentice warrior, and I can crush you with just my strength alone. Suddenly a pain came from his arm, and his punch, which he thought could never be missed, landed on empty air. At some point, Yunxiao had bent his 10 fingers into claws, and instead of retreating, he advanced and clutched the claws on Hejing's arm. Then, a sharp pain stabbed into the latter's mind. What made him even angrier was that the burst of strength on his arm vanished as soon as Yunxiao's claws clutched at him, and he could no longer muster any of his strength. After succeeding with the move, Yunxiao threw himself at Hejing and squatted slightly before slamming his right shoulder into the other's chest. Hejing felt nothing but numbness in his chest and a rush of blood in his throat. He staggered back from the impact and took a few steps before he could stand firmly. Oh well, this body. Yunxiao sighed in his heart, greatly dissatisfied with his current body. If he had Hejing's strength, the dragon style would have completely crippled his opponent's arm, and a subsequent slam would have killed him in seconds. But now, he had only caused pain in the latter's arm and numbness in the chest. What happened just now? Did anyone see it clearly? Yu Hejing's punch was powerful enough to crack a boulder, and I even saw a faint light of primordial qi. How could it be defended so easily? The students started mumbling again as they witnessed a martial apprentice getting pushed back by a normal human. Hejing's face was blank with shock. He still could not figure out what had happened. He could not feel any primordial qi from this brat. Although the move was amazing, it did not come with sufficient strength, or he would have not been simply shaken to the point where his blood started surging. He might have been cautious during normal times, but there stood beside him his goddess at the moment, so he could not lose face at all. Fuming with rage, he roared as he was about to rush over when the girl in a blue dress beside him said, "Senior Yu, forget it." With a look of shame and indignation on his face, Hejing said, "Landuo, give me 5 minutes. I'll cripple this kid and take this chamber for you." Landuo shook her head and said, "Never mind, he got the chamber first." Yunxiao's eyelids twitched slightly as he blurted out, "It's you?" A delicate and beautiful face came into his eyes, causing his thoughts to flutter slightly. Looking at Yunxiao in amazement, Landuo said softly, "I can't believe that just because you can't cultivate your strength, you have started cultivating your skills. The resources of the Li family are abundant indeed. That was an excellent move. However, skills without strength are for mere show." Yunxiao's expression became a little odd, but he agreed. "You're right." Meanwhile, Hejing's face grew darker. He stared at Landuo and asked, "Landuo, do you know him?" Instead of answering him, she smiled and said to Yunxiao, "So, it's impossible for you to defeat me. The gap between us will only grow larger. In fact, you are the young master of the Li family. So, even if you can't cultivate, you will still have a bright future. Why are you so persistent?" "The young master of the Li family?" Hejing was astonished. "He is that infamous loser of the Li family?" His expression suddenly turned odd. He had heard of Yunxiao's reputation as a loser who could never cultivate. Even the Grand Masters of the Alchemist Association could do nothing to help him. So, that kid is that infamous loser. No wonder I can't feel any primordial qi in him. I see. So, he has taken the path of skills. A warrior with amazing skills has a natural advantage in fighting against opponents of the same rank. But no matter how many skills he has mastered, they are useless in the face of an expert whose strength is 10 times greater. Yunxiao knew she had misunderstood, and he had a strange feeling in his heart. Before Gu Feiyang's soul had awakened, he did crazily woo her for a period. He still remembered the words she had uttered so decisively. "My husband must be a hero of indomitable spirit, and he will be a guardian of the state. In spite of your distinguished status, you are, after all, a loser who cannot practice martial arts. Defeat me one day, and only then will I give some thought to your proposal." He also remembered what a huge blow those words had brought to him, making him abandon himself even more. But now, he was no longer that simple Li Yunxiao, he was Gu Feiyang. He had met so many peerless beauties in his previous life who had knelt and cried and begged him to accept them. If they were holding hands together, They could even encircle the entire heavenly martial realm twice. For all her delicateness and beauty, Luo Landuo was a far cry from the beauties he had grown tired of seeing in his previous life. As a result, his heart was filled with a weird feeling right now. What? A good-for-nothing young master like him tried to woo you? He truly overestimated himself. Although Hejing had suffered a minor loss, he was in a good mood as soon as he realized that Yunxiao was a wastrel. Yunxiao raised his eyes slightly and gave Hejing a look. The sharp gaze pierced right into Hejing's heart like a blade, causing him to shudder with fear and shut his mouth immediately as beads of cold sweat broke out of his forehead. I think you've misunderstood. Whether I'm a piece of trash or not, I won't fight you. If there's nothing else, I'm going to cultivate. Once he had finished, Yunxiao waved his hand, and then walked straight into Chamber 013 before closing the door. Landuo was a little taken aback. She narrowed her beautiful eyes as if she were thinking about something. Hejing, on the other hand, widened his eyes as a massive storm surged in his heart. What happened? He's just a piece of trash who can't even open his chakras. But why did I feel cold all over as if I was falling into an abyss when he just glanced at me? Oh heavens, what a glance! He swallowed hard and looked at the closed door of Chamber 013, his forehead dripping with cold sweat. Suddenly, he found that he seemed to have developed a sense of fear for Yunxiao, which deprived him of his fighting will when he was facing the other again. For your sake, Landuo, I'll spare him this time. Let's go, Hejing said, still in shock and trying to save whatever face he still had. Landuo nodded as she turned and was about to leave when she suddenly gave a slight pause, then looked at Hejing and said, Senior Yu, what Li Yunxiao said just now is right. Although your tiger punch has great momentum, it's only the form. If you could master its essence, you wouldn't have been caught so easily by him. Hejing's face was lividly mixed with red, his eyes full of shame and anger, while his heart harbored an intense hatred for Yunxiao. As soon as Yunxiao entered the cultivating chamber, he glanced about and found it to be a space 100 meters squared in area. It was empty but for the 2 chunks of black ironstone placed in a corner, each about a meter tall and with the rough shape of a man. They were obviously the targets of martial arts practice, for they were covered in marks from fists and palms, as well as dents and scratches from swords and knives. One of them was badly damaged, having lost its proper shape. These 2 black iron stones must be over 100 years old. Yunxiao gave them a glance of admiration and ran his hand across their surfaces for a moment. Regardless of time or place, there were always warriors who were not afraid of hardship, and who poured in all their effort in cultivating as they advanced along the path of the strong. He gave a low cry. Now is not the time to be emotional about these things. I must regain my strength as soon as possible. As long as I unclog my meridians and condense primordial qi, I reckon I will return to the peak of the 9 heavens realm in 10 years. From the condensation of primordial qi to the peak of the 9 heavens realm, no matter how genius an individual was, it would take at least 100 years to achieve it. No one but Gu Feiyang would dare to make such a statement. Yunxiao rushed forward to throw a punch at the black iron dummy. Under the impact of tenfold gravity, it had been really beneficial for him to practice the tyrant body tempering technique. After throwing some punches, he somewhat understood his body's strength, and then started practicing the sun and moon style. After enduring for the span of 7 breaths, he finally lost his grip and was bounced off the wall. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood, his head left reeling. However, there was a smile on his sorry-looking face. Ha ha! Under 10 times the gravity, the effect of the moon and sun style really doubled. In less than 3 days, I will be able to attain the physique of an apprentice warrior, and at that time, I'll have at least a 60% chance of success in breaking through my meridians. He stood up again with his injured body, to start practicing over. A rapid crackle rang out from within him as his body bent backward in an incredible pose. His hands and feet joined to form a perfect circle, and then his muscles and bones began to transform subtly. In addition to the great pain, there was a strange force flowing back and forth within him. It was different from the primordial qi he used to know. The force that flowed through his muscles and blood vessels was a pure physical force. Just as Yunxiao was cultivating in seclusion, the news that he had defeated Yuvijing with one move had spread through the entire tenfold gravity zone. Everyone was pondering over the matter. Although he had the suspicion of resorting to advanced martial skills, the fact that he had defeated a peak-level apprentice warrior who had opened 7 chakras with the physique of an ordinary man still deeply shocked those who heard it, and even overturned the perception of some apprentice warriors. 3 days later, the door of Chamber 013 finally opened, and a man covered in blood walked out of it. The students waiting for their chambers in the public area were all horrified. A thick layer of hardened blood covered the surface of his body like a suit of bloody armor, sticking out like a sore thumb. And from his body came wafting out a pungent smell of sweat and blood, causing all the students to feel their stomachs churning, while some female students even started to vomit as they could not stand it. Apart from the pair of bright eyes, he did not look like a man at all. Under the horrified glances of the crowd, Yunxiao passed through them without even giving them a second look. What no one noticed was that when he first arrived here, he had to pause after every step while panting, but when he left, he looked relaxed as if he was walking on flat ground. Who was that? I can't believe he tortured himself until he looked like a ghost. Did he have to work so hard? You don't know? If I remember correctly, that was Li Yunxiao, who had defeated Yuvijing with one move. Stop lamenting and start cultivating hard, young man. A loser and a girl have already surpassed us. The students waiting in the gravity training hall started mumbling as Yunxiao walked straight into the teleportation array and disappeared from the tenfold gravity zone. Suddenly a cry of alarm echoed out. Everyone looked up and saw the student who was about to enter Chamber 013 standing before the door with a blank face. The puzzled crowd went over to the chamber, and what they saw instantly darkened their faces. A black ironstone target in the cultivation chamber had completely broken into 2, with its upper part lying on the ground. And on the ground was a terrifying mass of blood. Everyone's heart gave a hard jerk. Is this guy still a human being? Yunxiao's appearance in the gravity cultivating hall at the next moment was no less shocking. But the uproar soon calmed down, and all the students who saw him smiled bitterly. Yunxiao finally realized that his current look had attracted too much unwanted attention, so he immediately took a set of clean clothes out of his storage ring and put it on, then walked quickly back to his dormitory. Yunxiao took a shower as soon as he got back to his dormitory. His skin, which was scarred and terrifying to look at, turned out to be as smooth as jade, without a trace of a scar. And between his movements, he clearly felt a force he had long lost. Although it was still very weak, he was very satisfied with it. He wondered if it was truly the #1 body-tempering technique under the heavens, for it had given me a body that was stronger than the one cleansed with a 9th-grade spirit medicine. Now, with the physique of an apprentice warrior, I can start experimenting with some simple concoctions. As long as I can produce some low-level medicinal pills, my cultivation speed can be further accelerated. The strength of an alchemist depended on the strength of the soul, but many basic refinements required physical strength before they could be carried out. After getting out of the bath, Yunxiao then tied up his hair with a rubber band. He was thinking of buying some herbs and refining tools when he suddenly felt a chill in the back of his head. Someone was throwing a punch at him. He snorted coldly and reached a hand behind his back without so much as looking, grabbing toward the incoming attack. A burst of force slammed him in the palm as he closed his fingers tightly and did a backflip, his right hand turning 360 degrees along with his body. The air rang with a bone-cracking sound, accompanied by a loud scream. The person slammed right into the ground. It was Han Bei. He turned around and cried out loudly, "Young Master Yun, it's me. My arm." Only then did Yunxiao see who the person was, and was stunned. Fatty Han? Han Bei winced in pain as he looked at his arm, which was so twisted that it appeared like a braid dough, and said sadly, "Young Master Yun, my arm is crippled." "Serves you right. Who asked you to sneak up on me?" Yunxiao said crossly. Count yourself lucky that I've merely broken your bone into 7 pieces. Go to the infirmary later. You'll be all right in a few days. Yunxiao closed and placed his hand gently over Fatty Han's arms as he asked, Why are you here? I saw you were a little odd last time, so I wanted to test you out. It was then that Han Bai said incredulously, Young Master Yun, your strength. Could it be that? Yunxiao shook his head and said, I haven't opened my chakras yet. What do you want from me? Han Bai's eyes grew wide as he said disappointedly, You've become so strong, and yet you haven't opened your chakras? Where have you been hiding these days? Teacher Luo is looking for you everywhere. What does this little girl want from me? Is she going to send me to the gravity chamber? Yunxiao said indifferently. Just as he spoke, he stretched Fatty Han's arm to settle the bones back to their original place. Fatty Han cried out in agony. He then fell over on the ground. I reconnected your arm for you, said Yunxiao. Han Bai broke out in a cold sweat. Little girl, young Master Yun, you're not losing your mind, are you? If you want to die, just say it. Fatty Han instantly stood up, grabbed Yunxiao tightly, and said one more thing, you might be in big trouble. Lan Fei's gone these days too, and I heard that he's cultivating in seclusion to break into the origin realm. You've crippled Du Feng and Luojia, so he'll be looking for you first when he gets out. Yunxiao glanced at Han Bai, who looked worried and smiled. Just calm down. It's just the origin realm. It's just the origin realm? Han Bai said with anger and frustration. Do you know what the origin realm means? It means an individual has condensed primordial qi and become a real warrior. There's a big difference between warriors and us, apprentice warriors. Qinjin, Princess Rixue, and I have been worrying about you for days, but look at you. It's just the origin realm, huh? Yunxiao smiled faintly. He ignored what Fatty Han said and spoke in a serious tone. I have something more important that I will need you to do. What could be more important than this? Said Fatty Han. I'm going to buy something, but I'm short of money. Lend me some. Although Yunxiao was the young master of the Li family, he had long been excluded from the family, and his pocket money was not much. Han Bai produced his bag of holding and poured out a pile of gold coins. There are about 200 or 300 gold coins here, enough to last you a year. Just Han Bai was about to leave, he turned to look at Yunxiao and said, Are you really not worried at all? You know, there are over 3,000 freshmen in our intake, but only about 30 have made the breakthrough so far and become warriors. It is very dangerous. Oh, I'm worried, but it's no use worrying. How much money do you have now? Lend me it all and I'll pay you back some other time. Yunxiao again ignored what Fatty Han said and gave out a sinister smile while waving at Han Bai. Young Master Yun, I can feel that you've changed a lot. I got to hand it to you. As he was about to reach the door and open it up, just then, a loud bang suddenly rang out, and his fat body was subsequently thrown flying back. He left a trail of blood in the air before falling to the ground next to Yunxiao's feet, where he passed out. There was a distinct footprint on his bulging belly. A cold snort came from outside the door, and then a shadow was thrown over, falling next to Fatty Han. The man was covered in blood, his face swollen like a winter melon as he groaned in pain while being sprawled on the ground, muttering something that could not be understood. Yunxiao stared at him for a while before he recognized the man as Qinjin. He raised his head to look at the door. It was Lan Fei. You piece of trash who has no idea of death or danger. More than a dozen people rushed him through the door, led by none other than Lan Fei. Li Yunxiao, how dare you touch my men? Today, I'm going to cripple you completely. He walked proudly ahead, his energy rising with every step. By the time he came up to Yunxiao, a bright light shone out of him, making him look mighty. It was the light of primordial qi, the sign of a warrior. That's all for today. If you like the next part of this manhwa, just comment below. Thanks for watching and please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment for getting epic content on this channel. See you next time.